Hello, Rebecca. I know you can't really talk back right now, so I just wanted to say hi. And Margaret, hello, welcome. All right, bear with me, everybody, as I get us running up and live on Zoom as well, or I'm sorry, on Facebook as well. I hope everybody has had a fantastic day so far, and I'm glad to see that the weather has kind of held out for us. We did not have any rain over on our side, so that's nice. All right, give me a moment. Getting us up and running on Facebook as well. I hope everybody's doing good. You will notice that as of right now, hello, Peggy and Ken. You will notice that it's just me so far. And that is because we are, our speaker, Susan Inskeep Gray, had got called into a meeting. But do not fear, we still have the video to show. She went ahead and sent us a recording of her talk. So while it will not be completely and utterly interactive like we have with the other ones, we are able to have her talk and her speaking to us. It's just going to not be interactive to where she can't answer questions in this live video. However, she has let us know that anybody who has questions, you guys can by all means reach out to us, and we will definitely get this, get these over to her so she can answer them and we can get this information going. So again, excuse me, bear with me. Let us know that anybody who has questions, you guys can by all means reach out to us. All right. And we will definitely get this, get these over to her. So I am working on this right now. We can get this information going. So again, excuse me, bear with me. All right, give me one moment. I am working on this right now. All right. All right, well, I'm doing the best I can. I definitely had a bit of a mix up with getting this on Facebook, but we are going to go ahead and continue because I don't want to keep you guys waiting any longer. All right, so as I mentioned, my name is Linda Rusas. I'm with the Village Drive Village and Focus on Nova, here with our Masters Monday. And today we are talking about Susan Inskeep Gray has gone ahead and given us a video to share since she's not able to make it with us. She got called into a meeting, but I have it ready. So we're going to go ahead and watch the video that she has provided for us. And any questions that you have, you can feel free to put them in the chat, or if you want to email them to Tracy or I, we can get those up and running and over to her so she can answer those questions. So let me go ahead and get my sharing happening so we can watch the video. And let me move it over. That's not what I want to do. Let me get on the right one first. All kinds of mix-ups today. All right, here we go. All right.
This conference will now be recorded. All right. Well, welcome again, everybody, and thank you to those of you that are joining us today. My name is Cami St. Germain with the City of Fairfax Office of Historic Resources, and I'd like to welcome our speaker, Susan Inskeep Gray, who's going to be giving our presentation. As evidenced by the fact when I came into the office today, she was wearing her West Virginia University mask. So Susan, for you, I say go Mountaineers. So. And Susan, among many exhibits she's curated for us over the years, she curated our Fairfax Museum's, I believe it was 2017 exhibition, Chalkboards to Smartboards. And so this talk is an extension of that exhibit and going now into our current time period as well. So Susan, thank you so much for kicking off our 2021 program series. And I'm going to make you the speaker. So you should be able to say hello and share your screen whenever you're ready. And folks, again, I'll hop back on afterwards to help facilitate any questions. Susan, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I think the timing, the PowerPoint went away. So let me pull it up again.
The joys of technology.
Yes.
I always joke that we're all historians, but tech is not necessarily always our strength.
It also gave me a blank slide, but that's all right. Now, Cami and I, okay, I'm full screen. No, wait a minute. No.
If you go to slideshow, or there we go, then you're ready to go.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. All right. Well, it's really nice to be able to meet everyone virtually, and I look forward to any questions that you might have at the end of the program. And as Cami said, we mounted and curated ourselves, thanks to Cami, Andrea, and a whole host of volunteers, a major exhibition on the history of public schools in Fairfax County and Fairfax City. And the name of that exhibition was Chalkboards to Smartboards, which I've also picked up as the title for this talk, since most of the things that you're going to see as images and statistics and different themes and different innovations and changes in public schools those were all part of the research that we did back in 2016 and 2017. And as everyone knows, 2021 has been a very different learning experience for teachers, for students, for anyone involved with public schools in Fairfax County, and of course across our nation. This, of course, is due to the COVID-19 virus, which much of the education being virtual or some sort of hybrid resource for our students. So I think 2020, we can say, has probably been as challenging as back in 1870 when the first year of public education, a brand new free government initiative in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So let's go ahead and get started. And this slide is education in Fairfax prior to 1870. There was education. If you see the top image on the right, People who could afford it, wealthy people, would bring in a tutor, or sometimes families would combine and host a tutor for the children of different farms and different businesses. And that was an option really only open to the wealthy. In what's now the city of Fairfax, the image on your left shows the name of the school there. You see in the image on the left is called Coombe Cottage. That was a private school for young women here in what was then Fairfax Courthouse, or the town of Providence. And there really were some education opportunities for the very poor white population that were called some free schools. But it was people, the community in the middle of that, between the very wealthy and the very poor, that education really was almost non-existent outside of family resources. At the end of the Civil War, the image that you see on the lower right-hand side is from what was called a Freedmen's Bureau school. The Freedmen's Bureau under the United States government provided different services for newly emancipated African Americans, and some of those, what were called freedmen schools, were located in Fairfax County. And there was one school that we have information on located in what was then, again, the town of Providence, or Fairfax Courthouse. But it was not until 5 years after the Civil War ended in 1865, and under a new revised constitution for the Commonwealth of Virginia, led by the man on the right, John Underwood, that there was an act in the General Assembly for the Commonwealth of Virginia, an act to establish and maintain a uniform system of public free schools. And the map in the middle is a map from that time period showing the literacy rates. The darker images for the less literate part of the population. And if you look above, if you see across the Northeast, Pennsylvania, extending all the way to Vermont and Maine, it's much lighter because free public schools had been established in those areas prior to the Civil War. The first superintendent, and he was called the Superintendent of Instruction, was the man you see on the left, Dr. William Ruffner. He was a very well-educated man for his time, and led, along with John Underwood, the politician and government official, led and pushed for the establishment of the free public school system. As it was established, it was a racially separate free public school system across the Commonwealth. And certainly that was the common form of education across the former Confederate states. So we see two early photographs of these early schools from the late 19th century. The one on the left is Fairview School. I always include Fairview because I had 5 children who went through Fairview Elementary School. It looked a little different in the late 20th century when they were students, but it is one of the very first schools. And that school, the modern building still stands at the corner of Ox Road, Route 123, and Burke Center Parkway. The image on your right shows one of these schools for Black or African American students. That's Odrick's Corner School, that is west of Tyson's Corner near Lewinsville. As happened with both the schools for white and Black students, a lot of times the parcel of land was given by a landowner in that area of the county. The image in the middle is the first man, the first superintendent for free public schools in Fairfax County. That's Thomas Moore. He was a local attorney here in what is now Fairfax City. In fact, the house that he lived in still stands and is part of the National Register Historic District. At that time also, there were different superintendents and people in charge of the schools in the different magisterial district. So where we are in Central Fairfax today was part of Providence District. And so those districts had a lot of control and decision-making over the local schools in those areas. The first record we have of the number of students and the number of buildings comes from Mr. Moore's short term, really, as the superintendent in 1873. There were 73 log and frame buildings in the school system and 1 brick building. So 27 buildings that were log and frame, and those included both the schools for white and Black students, and a total of 1,063 students. And as we go through, I will give you some other statistics related to schools, but keep in mind how many buildings they started out with in the very first years. And here in Fairfax, we have one of the great champions across the Commonwealth, a champion of free public schools. That's the man you see in the center image. His name is Richard Rateliffe Farr. And he had served during the Civil War as a Mosby Ranger, then went to Salem College. And he did not graduate, but received 2 years of education there at the college and became the strongest advocate across the Commonwealth for the free public school system. And you might think, well, why were people against free public schools? Well, one main reason was expense. The building, of course, of the buildings, the hiring of the teachers. And Virginia at that time, excuse me, was still trying to pay off its pre-war debt. So a number of legislators preferred to pay off the debt and not start a free public school system. But Mr. Farr prevailed. And as you'll see, one of the pamphlets for free public schools you see on the right. So it was a real lobbying campaign at that time. And people really had to be convinced of the need for the free public schools. Earlier, I mentioned that there were 27 log and frame buildings in 1873. What I didn't mention is that there was also 1 brick building. And that is the building that you see on the left. And I'll just have to see later if anyone recognizes that building today. Excuse me. Before I leave the slide, in addition to free public schools, I have to mention that Mr. Farr also led the campaign and was successful for the first College of Higher Education for African American Students. That was Virginia Union University. So he was very much responsible for ensuring the public school system succeeded at that time. And he himself then later in the 1880s served as what we would call today the state superintendent of schools, what was called then the superintendent of instruction for the Commonwealth of Virginia. So we certainly have a real local champion for our public school system from the very beginning. This is a photograph of students from the 1880s at that Fairfax Public School #1, the building that you just saw in the earlier slide. And unfortunately, we don't have a photograph from the late 19th century of African American students. This is the earliest one we have. This is the African American school in the town of Fairfax in 1916. And if you're familiar with the makeup today of Fairfax City, this school, the lot where this school stood, is now part of the Fairfax City Cemetery. Moving into the early part of the 20th century, until the 1930s, Fairfax County had a number of 1-room or 2-room frame schools. Things began to change with succeeding school superintendents for the county. There we go. Okay, I'm sorry about my voice giving out here. In the early part of the 20th century, as I mentioned, there were still quite a number of the 1- or 2-room frame schools. But under Mr. Hall, the superintendent that you see on the left, both curriculums began changing. He started an organized program of teacher training and certification, and started standardizing curriculums across the county. And he was succeeded in 1931 by the image that you see in the middle on the lower portion of the slide. And that's W.T. Woodson. He would serve as superintendent of Fairfax County Schools for the next 30 years. And it was really under Mr. Woodson's tenure that new schools were built, brick schools. As you will see, this is the original Fairfax High School in the top right, and the Burke School in the bottom right. So they began replacing the buildings such as the one you see in the top left, which is actually one of the very first high schools in Clifton. And in addition to building new, larger school buildings, of course, then Mr. Woodson began consolidating the schools, closing a number of the one-room schools. And the way that he was able to build some of these new brick schools was from funding from what was called the Works Progress Administration under President Roosevelt in the 1930s. So both of the schools, the brick schools that you see here, were partially funded with federal money from Work Progress Administration. I mean, it doesn't seem to want to advance. There we go. And the first consolidated high school was Fairfax High School that you see here in the upper picture. That opened in the school year of 1934-35. And these are some of the early photographs from that consolidated school. This, I believe, is on the lower left is the second graduating class there, and the first football team. If you've been watching any of the football playoff games this weekend, I think you can see a huge difference in the uniforms and certainly protective equipment there. Well, Mr. Woodson made great use of the WPA funds for schools for white students. None of that money went to African-American schools. And there was all through the period of segregated schools, there was a great disparity in the types of schools that were built, the staffing, the amenities in the schools to include bathrooms, running water, for example, and a big difference in teacher salaries. As you'll see at this time, this is the 1930s, the average white teacher's salary was $834, and the average Black teacher's salary was $420. So those figures can really tell the story about the expenditures made by the county and the difference in those funds used for African-American schools and schools for white students. The image on the right is from a newspaper of that time period with the African-American citizens of the county laying out some of their complaints and laments about the lack of funding being directed to their schools. Now, Fairfax County and other places across the South were very fortunate to have financial help from Julius Rosenwald, who was one of the founders of the Sears, Roebuck and Company. Mr. Rosenwald helped fund thousands of schools across the former Confederate states. One of those schools was here in what was then the town of Fairfax, and there were 3 other schools that Mr. Rosenwald helped fund in Fairfax County. This image shows the opening of that school, the Rosenwald School in the town of Fairfax, in the late 1920s. We believe that's 1927. And this was probably the opening day, the dedication of the school, from the dress of the people and the material culture that you can see there. Mr. Rosenwald, though, he wasn't like it, he did not just give out money. There was always an investment in the schools from the African-American population in that community. So there was a contribution from the African community, and then also a small contribution from the Fairfax County government. image that you see of students in the upper left corner, those are students who attended the Rosenwald School here in the town of Fairfax. And I don't think with this I'm able to use my laser pointer, but if you see on the last row, the top row, the young woman on the right with, it looks like she has braids or pigtails that are coming down to her shoulders. That is Etta Bowles-Strozier. We're very thankful that she has shared some of her collection from the African American schools with the museum, and she is still living. I believe she is 104 years old and still lives here, very near to her family, her original family home on Roberts Road. World War II and the Cold War that followed prompted a suburban and student explosion. Fairfax had remained a pretty much rural area, so that was the reason for a need for a lot of one-room and two-room schools because of the rural population being spread across the county. And with World War II brought a lot of new residents to the Northern Virginia area, including Fairfax County. Part of that, of course, through the military effort in World War II with the building of the Pentagon that you see in the middle photograph being built in 1942. And then after World War II ended, and during the Cold War period, the military increased, the government increased, and a number of defense and research and consulting firms located in this area. And very quickly, starting in the post-World War II period, the farms, the dairy farms that had been the economic engine for Fairfax County since after the Civil War, those farms began being replaced by subdivisions, by schools, by places of worship. And so those suburban development brought new families and of course a lot of new students. Fairfax County was also the location for several Nike missile sites during the Cold War period in the 1950s and 1960s. So more people are coming to Fairfax County to live, and of course that means new schools and new buildings and changes within the school structure of the school system. This is in 1961. This is, you'll see Mr. Woodson there just at the end of his tenure as superintendent. He's the man with white hair and glasses with two hands on a schematic for a new school. And according to the school superintendent, Mr. Funkerberg said, "Unparalleled growth, it just won't stop." And the headline in 1959, the newspaper headline, "Fairfax opens 4 new schools." 4 new schools on opening day in September 1959. And the graph with the young student and his book bag going up steps, you'll see how very much the school population changed during that time. It said it just didn't stop. It's growing all the way up until I think that chart ends in 1959 and 1960. So of course, family makeup, the nuclear family makeup, it was very common during that post-World War II period for families to have 4 children. So it's just not the number of people moving into the county. but the family makeup at that time. And then let's look more specifically here during that growth period, during the explosion of population and the explosion of schools. What is happening in the African American community as far as education? And the top image on the left is from May 1954, when the Supreme Court outlawed segregation of public schools. The woman sitting there on the steps holding the newspaper with her arm around a young girl. So what was Fairfax County doing about that Supreme Court ruling? Well, basically not much for several years. In fact, Fairfax County did not have a high school for African American students until 4 months after the Supreme Court ruled that segregation in public schools was unlawful. The high school, called Luther Jackson High School, named after Dr. Porter Luther Jackson. He was a Virginia educator, a civil rights activist, and when that school opened in 1954, the community named the school for Luther Jackson. And the other images in this show, some of the images from Luther Jackson when it was a segregated high school for African American students. You'll see the band in the lower left, students in the library, the top right, and bus drivers there on the bottom right. Before Luther Jackson opened, if you wanted a high school education as an African American resident of Fairfax County, you would need to take public transportation into Washington, D.C., or to what was then the regional high school for African American students in Manassas. So again, it's a little bit ironic that the first high school for African Americans doesn't even open in Fairfax County until after segregation in public schools is outlawed. And it was a slow path to desegregation, which finally happened in the school year of 1965 and 66. And this, the closing exercise of program, the image that you see on the right, is from the last commencement and baccalaureate held at Luther Jackson as a segregated high school. There were several voices in the county for desegregation. I'm going to focus here just on two. One is school board chairperson, William Hoofnagel. He had been a member of the Board of Supervisors first, and then was the school board chair. He really pushed for desegregation to take place. He's recalled as being a very calming voice during that time period. Another voice was the principal of the segregated Luther Jackson High School, Principal Taylor Williams. After desegregation in 1965 and 66, Mr. Williams stayed on and became the principal of the newly integrated Luther Jackson Middle School. Mr. Williams went on to be principal of James Madison High School in Vienna, the first African American to be principal of Fairfax County Public School. And this is some images from that time period. The large image is from the Green Acres Elementary School here in what was then the city of Fairfax, Fairfax City. The headline, "The final barriers have been lifted." That's what the Fairfax City Times headline read in July of 1965. African-American students had been allowed on a case-by-case basis to attend what had been all white schools. The classroom image from on your left on the screen on the left, you'll see there's one African-American student. This was at Lanier, what is now Lanier Middle School in 1959. And then the cartoon from, I believe it's from the Reston Times on the lower right of your screen, is two young students now going to the same school, eating lunch together. And the white student says to his fellow student, the African-American, he said, "Hey, did you come on the school bus today?" And the African-American student answers, "No, my family has lived next door for over 100 years." So those are some of the images from that 1960s period of desegregation. It did take Fairfax Circuit Court ruling on desegregating the schools. At first, the county had asked to do it gradually, to integrate or desegregate over a 12-year period, starting with the grades. In 1 year, they would do first grade, then second grade, then third grade. And I say 12 grades because kindergarten was not instituted in Fairfax County as part of the Fairfax County Public Schools until 1968. But the Circuit Court overruled that, and they said, the Supreme Court said that this should be done judiciously and quickly implemented, and of course, bringing it out through 12 years was not a very quick action. So the county relented and followed the Fairfax County Circuit Court order on that. The 1970s brought the building of several secondary schools. This is the construction of Robinson Secondary School in the 1970s. Other secondary schools at that time were Lake Braddock and Hayfield. But the 1970s and the 1980s were really tough times for Fairfax County Public Schools. They had just implemented desegregation, and while generally things went smoothly, there were, as you might imagine, a number of tension-filled days during those early periods. The baby bust, again, schools follow the demographics, and where families had been having many times 4 children in one family, the rate of the child birth rate drops as more and more women enter the workforce in the 1970s and 1980s. And so family units become smaller with, I think it's 2.3 number of children compared with the 4 children in a family in that immediate post-war period. So I hope you can see on your screen the graph on the top right. If you see it, it's going up, a steady up until you get to the late 1960s, 70s, and then that school population begins leveling off there. So while the school system in the 50s and 60s had been dealing with how can we build another new school quickly, they're now dealing with a change in family units. And they're also dealing with a population shift in Fairfax County from the east to the west to some of the new areas, such as Reston, the Herndon area. And so they have schools that are overcrowded in the western part of the county and underpopulated in the eastern part of the county. And schools like Fairfax Elementary School, that's the image on the top left of your screen, that had opened in 1924 and then closed in the mid-70s. It had been overcrowded, and then because of the change in suburban developments and where families with young children, school-age children, were moving within the county, that school closed. And there are many other examples during the 70s and the 80s of that happening. However, Fairfax City in 1972 moved to a new campus, the current campus. This is an aerial image of the new campus for Fairfax City's high school. And as you'll see from the headline, it says Fairfax City gets the area's most up-to-date high school. And technology, the schools system is always looking at technology, and a lot of technological changes in the last part of the 20th and the 21st century. But the claim on the technology when the new Fairfax High School campus opened in 1972 was that there was a TV in every classroom. And as the school system moved out of the 70s and the 80s, again, technology is a big issue with the coming online of computers. And who recognizes or who has ever used the computer that you see on the top left, compared with the laptop and keyboard on the bottom image. So integrating that technology into the school curriculum, training people, training teachers for that use, and also adapting curriculum to that new technology was a major emphasis in the last part of the 20th century, and of course still continues today. Another thing happening in Fairfax County Public Schools is at that time is the growing diversity of the students. Students are with their families, are coming to live in Fairfax County from across the world. I think in the early 21st century at the local Daniels Run Elementary School, there were 118 different dialects spoken there. So another push with the school system is learning English as a second language to bring those students up to par with English, and a new program such as the English as a second language program for students arriving with either none or minimal English language skills. So really, as I said, into a new century, into the 21st century, it's learning taking place in a global community with, it seems, technological changes almost weekly. And teaching for the 21st century, this is a quote from former Superintendent Dr. Karen Garza. And she's laying out in her philosophy methods of teaching and what students need to learn to be able to navigate this fast and vastly changing world that they'll be entering when they finish the curriculums at Fairfax County Public Schools. This is an image again of how schools have changed. This is it shows the renovation of Fairfax High School from 2006 and 2007, and an image of students there at the high school whose families have come from all parts of the globe. As former school board chair and now city council member Janice Miller has said, she said, today's schools are not even our parents' schools. They are schools for now. And if we as adults, as students go into those schools with the number of curriculums offered, we would not probably recognize a lot of the changes just in our own lifetime. And this just shows two images from the exhibition that I mentioned earlier, chalkboards to smartboards, of course, looking at chalkboards that students in the 1870s and for decades after that would have used, to the smartboards that are now in every classroom. And I think to update this, we would have to say chalkboards to smartboards and now virtual learning, which has been the norm since public schools closed their doors, not the resources of learning, but in-person learning, and had to quickly make changes using that new technology to have virtual learners of Fairfax for Fairfax County Public School students in 2020, and at least for the first part of 2021. So thank goodness for that technology that has been able to assist the teachers, administrators, with ensuring that Fairfax County students are still receiving the top education that the county is known for. In the late 20th century and early 21st century, there's also been an interest in the preservation of some of those early public schools. The image that you see on the left is the Laurel Grove School that in the Franconia Springfield area, just off of Beulah Road and Fairfax County Parkway. That school, the Laurel Grove School for African Americans, has been preserved and is used as a teaching and interpretation school for early education and African American life at that time. The other school that's been preserved and used for public education for at least before COVID, for school groups and different tour groups, is the Legato School. It was moved to the Fairfax County Courthouse Complex grounds as part of the Centennial Project for Fairfax County Public Schools. And of course, that Centennial period from 1870 to 1970. And we could not forget this building where I'm sitting and talking to you today. The building is now Fairfax Museum and Visitor Center. But if you look in the bottom lower right, you'll see what the building looked like when it was completed in 1873. As public school number 1 in Providence district. It has been changed, but even the change and the new addition that we call it is 100 and coming up on 100, over 108 years. And that's the front part of the building with the columns and the porch. that was added to the 1873 building in 1912. As Fairfax school population grew, and as more and more parents saw the value of free public education, and so that was a growth period in the beginning of the 20th century. In 1992, the building became Fairfax Museum and Visitor Center, which it is today. Since the building started its history as that very important public school number one, the first two-story brick schoolhouse in Fairfax County, education and is one of our main missions. We collect everything that has to do with school history, and of course, particularly anything connected with the school history of our building, now Fairfax Museum and Visitor Center. And prior to COVID, we welcomed many students from across the county for programs coming from their schools, on field trips, also different youth group programs. So education has always been really a mission of this building, both when it was a public school and also as Fairfax Museum and Visitor Center. And so I'd just like to close by thanking you with showing you 3 images of our school history. And some of these images you've seen in other slides, but the large group at the bottom, when during segregation, the white school, students standing outside in front of the frame building on the top left is the African-American school here in what was then the town of Fairfax from 1916. And then a group of students that really represent the demographics and the population of Fairfax County today. Those students are were students, I should say, at Fairfax High School. And I would just like to close by, again, thanking you. I'm sorry that my voice, I've been home teleworking, so I don't think I've been talking as much. So I apologize for my cracky voice. And also, please know that we will continue with school history, and we'll be looking at presenting some of this information again in 2021 or 2022 with a little bit late celebration of the 150 years of free public education. But because of COVID, obviously we just could not have done that in 2020. And of course, part of that history we'll be bringing in is the history of 2020 and of 2021, and all the means that Fairfax County Public Schools has undertaken, and sometimes had to do it very quickly, to keep up that role of education. If you remember, the first statistics that we have on Fairfax County Public Schools comes from the early 1870s. With those 27 log and frame buildings and that one brick building added in 1873 to accommodate 1,063 students. Today, there are 196 different school buildings, school facilities, serving 185,000 students. The school system is the largest public system in the Commonwealth of Virginia and the 12th largest in the nation. And as I said earlier, Fairfax County Public School prides itself on the excellence of education and continues to do that during this very difficult period that we're in of COVID-19. So thank you very much for joining us today for our January 2021 second Sunday program. And I particularly thank my colleague, Cammie St. Germain, for handling the technology for us. Thank you, Cammie. And thanks to everyone who joined in today.
All right, give me a moment. All right, I am slowly getting everybody on here. Let me go ahead and open it up so everybody is allowed to talk. So everybody does have the ability to comment. You just have to go ahead and unmute yourself if you would like to say anything. And what did everybody think of the talk?
It was great.
Yes. So as I mentioned when we started, so Susan Inskeep Gray, while she is a fabulous talker and has spoken with us a couple times, she did have to send us over a video recording, which is why we had that today. But it was fascinating. I mean, seeing the difference in just where we started and where we are today is just amazing. Now, let me ask you, even though it's not interactive to where we don't have her on this talk right now, does anybody have any questions that they would want me to reach out to Susan to get answered for you? Okay, I'm going to assume not. All right. Oh, great presentation. Okay, so Peggy has to jump off, but that's okay. I want to again say thank you to everybody who was able to join us today. I do want to give a quick note for coming up. We do have wanted to point out that our July Masters Monday does fall on a holiday. So we are not going to be holding a Masters Monday for the month of July. Be falling on July 5th. We have decided to go ahead. We reached out to some different speakers, and just the timing of everything is going to be a little hard. So we're not going to be having that. However, for our June Masters Monday, this is going to be fascinating. So we have Cindy Bennett, and she is going to be talking to us. The title of her talk is Suffragette Night of Terror. So she is going to be talking to us about the history of the suffragettes in the Northern Virginia area. I'm sure many of you know that the Lorton prison was one of the holding spots for some of the suffragettes who were arrested. So there's just a lot of history there, not only for our particular area, but for the nation as a whole. And then, excuse me, to also give you guys a little bit more information for some of the other talks that we did get booked for later this summer. We do have a gentleman, his name is Carl Craig. He is going to be talking to us in August. He is a fascinating gentleman in and of his own right. And he is actually coming on. I had a conversation with him for something for work, and we were on the phone for 2 hours just talking. So he is former FBI. He was one of the head FBI agents who was tracking and trying to apprehend the DC sniper. So he is going to be coming on, and he is going to tell us all kind of the story, the deep in-depth story of the DC sniper, and give us a lot of the in-depth background information, since he was one of the main FBI agents on that case when all of that was happening in the early 2000s. So that is going to be very exciting. So mark your calendars for that. That's going to be August 2nd. And then in September, we have Chuck Morrow, who is coming back, and he's going to be talking to us more about some Civil War history. And then some other speakers that we have lined up or are working with getting, they have shown interest. We just have to nail down exactly their topics, titles, and then also their dates. But we do have one of the president or vice president of the new Fort Belvoir Museum we're trying to get him to come on to talk to us about that. Obviously, we're going to be doing that in November. And then we also have a journalist, Michael Pope, who is going to be talking to us, if not once, but twice. But one of the topics that he is going to be talking to us about is going to be about the German POWs in Northern Virginia, since that was a conversation that we had from the last Masters Monday. I did track Michael down. He actually, when I was at the magazine, he was the one that wrote the article. And surprisingly enough, this is not actually the German POW camp that we were speaking about in over in the Fairfax area. But this is actually more in the Arlington area. There was another one, and it was kind of a secret camp that they had over there. So he's going to come on and he's going to talk to us about that. So please make sure to mark your calendars for the first Monday of every month to join us for more exciting. This year is the year of history, so more exciting historical information about Northern Virginia. But do please mark on your calendar that the July 5th Masters Monday is going to be a holiday. So, yes, thank you everybody for joining us. I do appreciate it. And again, thank you for bearing with us while I had my little technology issues at the beginning of this talk. And then also the fact that it wasn't as interactive, but you know, Susan was gracious enough to get this recording to us, so she didn't completely miss the talk, so everybody could still get all the information. But she did, like I mentioned earlier, she got pulled into a meeting, so that's why she was not able to join us live tonight.
Thank you so much.
All right, everybody enjoy their evening.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.